Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Atomi Brainwaves, our podcast on education for educators. Brainwaves is produced by our wonderful team here at Atomi, an online teaching and learning platform for secondary education. We provide engaging, curriculum-specific videos and text lessons for over 190 subjects, as well as matching quizzes and exam practice that can be used for both learning and formative assessment. We also provide powerful analytics that can help teachers diagnose how their students are progressing and zero in on who might need a little bit of extra help. We aim to make life easier for teachers, give them more time to work on the most important things, and ultimately help to generate better outcomes. If you'd like to find out more about Atomi, head over to getatomy.com and feel free to give it a go for free. This week, I chatted to our resident teaching expert Sue on the subject of teacher well-being. We discussed attitudes around teacher well-being in the education world, how they are changing over time, and the initiatives that both individual teachers and schools can take to maintain positive well-being. If you like the sound of that, make sure to subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your preferred platform is. And while you're at it, feel free to leave us a quick 5-star review. In the meantime, take a listen and enjoy.
Are you going to teach us anything?
What, you want me to teach you something? You want to learn something? All right. You got it!
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Atomi Brainwaves. I'm your host Simon. Today I'm joined by our resident teaching expert, former head of English, digital learning leader for curriculum and pedagogy, and director of curriculum, Sue. Hello, Sue.
Hi, Simon. How's things going over there?
Things are good. We're obviously, not sure when this episode is going to come out. Hopefully the lockdown will have ended by then, but at time of recording, we remain very much locked down over here in Ireland, and I believe it's the same over in Australia.
It is, yes. A very unusual time right now.
Absolutely. And a time, I guess, we'll be talking about it in a general sense, but it does very much apply to the current situation to our topic for today of teacher well-being is very pertinent for a time like now.
Yeah.
What a wonderful segue that was. Off to a flyer.
Nicely done.
Off to a flyer. Thank you. So, obviously, the notion of teacher well-being, it's kind of, as a concept, it's pretty intuitive to understand. So I guess we don't need the usual kind of broad scientific definition to open with. So I guess, well, I mean, if you want to give us
learning theories or neuroscience tonight.
Do you have any? No,
I'm good. I'm good. I'll have a night off.
Okay. Just this once, we'll leave the learning theories behind.
Sure.
But to start with, I thought, it would be a good idea to, instead of trying to define the term, which, is pretty, as I say, pretty intuitive, to explore teacher well-being as an issue and how it is something that perhaps has been underserviced in the past in terms of the discussion, the discourse around it, how it's been approached, what's changed, and where it stands today in the modern consciousness of teachers.
Yeah, I think it's a topic that has, as you say, sort of maybe grown in momentum or changed as such or become a bigger thing. Over my years of teaching, I started teaching 19 years ago. I don't remember it being a thing then. I was in the UK when I started teaching. And I remember there being a lot of focus on newbie teachers. New graduates and making sure that they stayed in the profession. Now, for me, that was very lucrative in the UK because I got what was called a golden handshake back then. Okay. I think it was £4,000, which was pretty cool. But yeah, because there was a shortage of English teachers. And so if you basically stayed in English teaching for 2 years, not the first year, but you survived the first year and the second year, then you got a £4,000 government handout, which was great. But it was reflective of the fact that a lot of teachers did give up. There's a 4-year degree, and then they gave up after the first year or so. And I think I've always thought that's just so tragic, when you've studied for that long and you've had this career in mind that you, through the circumstances, probably no circumstance of your own making, have not been able to pursue what you started, So I think teacher wellbeing has perhaps grown out of that idea that it's really hard being a teacher, and it's become increasingly hard. I think, if I look back to, it was, I probably got rose-coloured glasses on, but I feel like it was a simpler time 19 years ago. We obviously there was the internet. It wasn't that long ago, but we didn't have.
It's early days. It's fledgling years.
But we didn't have the level of communication that we have now. We didn't have the access. Access to you as a teacher. Students can access you whenever they want. Teachers, parents can access, colleagues, etc. All of that kind of, the advent of the really digital age, I think, has changed a lot of that. And I think with that, it's kind of brought around a lack of boundaries. And I think that probably that lack of boundary has resulted in this idea of needing to focus on teacher wellbeing, teachers having time to switch off.
Which is really a really interesting way of looking at it, because I suppose we talk so much on this podcast and in Atomi in general about all of the many, many benefits that the internet has brought to a teacher. And it's true, it absolutely has opened so many doors, but yeah, it at the same time, there is that flip side to that equation, which is the new pressures that it places on a teacher and the increased stress that it can bring.
Yeah, and I heard something the other day that said, graduating teachers today, that in some ways they won't have as hard a time as the teachers like me who, say, lived through the last sort of 20 years when technology has really come on and has really been a big driver in the educational space. Because a graduating teacher nowadays, it's just the norm, when they do their teacher training degree, practices such as, using a learning management system or, using technology for increased engagement, etc., Google Classrooms, whatever. It's part of their teaching practice, and they'll see it in the schools that they do their, that they do their pracs in. But for teachers of the last kind of 20 years, they've had to learn an awful lot on the job, as well as doing everything that they normally did. So if I think of the different things that a teacher does, you've got your content, your curriculum, your pastoral care, your assessments, you've got parents, teachers, you've got things like special provisions, disability changes, you've got external testing, internal testing, data analysis, any initiative that your school might run. You've got league tables, competition tables, you've got student behaviour to deal with. If you're in New South Wales, you've got 100 hours of PD to do every 5 years. And then you put on top of all of that the absolute massive array of technology that you could choose or your school has chosen for you. And then, you think no wonder, like, teachers are swamped, because that's a lot. And for me, it's always been a job that is never finished. Like, you could always, you could work 24 hours a day, because you could literally always do something better or pursue a different direction or have a look at a new pedagogy. Like, it's endless. And I think the fact that the boundaries are very blurred has not helped teachers to, switch off. And so I think teacher wellbeing, helping teachers in their own sort of mental and physical wellbeing has therefore become a thing, and I think that's really great. I think it needs to be a thing.
Yeah, and I suppose it's even just hearing you outline that list, it almost made me feel a bit stressed out myself of all of those huge wide variety of factors. But the upside to it is that it is, as we say, it is a priority now. It is something that is at the forefront of a lot of teachers' mind, and teachers going into the profession and even teachers who have been in it for quite a while, it's now something that is being talked about. Would that be fair to say?
Yes and no. I think it's being talked about, but I don't think it's at the forefront. And I certainly don't think that, in many ways, when I've seen teacher wellbeing talked of in schools, I've seen teachers more stressed because of teacher wellbeing, because they feel like it's something else they should be doing. Or
the irony.
I know, it's a great irony, and that shows that we're not actually there to actually solving the problem yet. Like, so it's definitely on the table now, but I just sadly haven't seen it done in a way that teachers are actually saying, yeah, that really helped me. You know, it's actually seemed like another add-on that they don't have time for. And that's not meant to be what it is at all.
Yeah.
But, you know, that kind of, you know, it's like telling a stressed person to stress less. Of course, they're going to stress more about being stressed. You know, so it's like, how do you actually do it to really be of benefit to teachers? But yeah, I think it's definitely growing in momentum, but in terms of being forefront and such a prominent thing, in terms of it actually being solved, no way near yet.
There's work to be done.
Absolutely.
Well, we're going to dive into in just a moment the practicalities element of that and suggestions that you might have for teachers in solving that problem of teacher well-being not being an extra stress, but effective ways to make sure your well-being as a teacher is in the right place. But before we get there, I wanted to kind of ask about, we've heard mentioned a broad range of factors there, but I wanted to see if you could pick out maybe just a few of the most common major factors that influence a teacher's well-being. And also, I think an interesting and key question is how these factors can change throughout a teacher's career, you know, while, you know, the question of whether they're just timeless, whether it's the same things are causing problems for every teacher all the way up, or different factors that, you know, might be be an extra stress for a teacher at the beginning of their career versus somebody who's maybe in a leadership position or is at the other end of the spectrum, has been teaching for hundreds and hundreds of years. So, what are those major factors, and how do they change over time?
It's funny because at the moment my entire life is in the kind of webinar world, and, you know, doing polls to increase audience engagement and things like that. And so I can imagine this as a poll. And I reckon if I put time down as one of the things, like pretty much every teacher would say that the major factor that influences their well-being is the lack of time, you know. So I think when I first started teaching, you know, like I'm high school, obviously, so I know it's different for primary. But talking from my own context, you know, you have freeze during the day sometimes. And it used to be that you could actually do work in those frees. But nowadays, I feel like those frees they pretty much don't exist. You know, you've got kids coming to you with issues, or you've got, I think one of the worst things for teacher wellbeing is you think you've got some time in the day to do something and you get taken on a cover lesson. And so, you know, a colleague's sick, you've got to cover their class. And of course you have to do it because, you know, kids can't be left unsupervised. But that was kind of like your precious little time that you were going to do something. And so it's snatched away, and it happens regularly. And so that becomes what you then have to do that evening, you know. And if you compound that several times, there's just very little time. And I think that's because there's been increased, you know, variety of pressures, as I just outlined then. You know, so for example, last year I had to train a load of my teachers in how to administer NAPLAN online. You know, so NAPLAN has been cancelled this year, obviously, but our school did NAPLAN online, and I selected 6 teachers who I thought would be able to help me in that, you know. And so the poor things then had to do after school training sessions in how to administer the tests online, give up 4 days of teaching to do the online tests, which actually broke because the systems weren't ready for it, not our school systems, but the national school systems. and that's okay. The government say, okay, NAPLAN's going to be online, save the marking load, etc. We can get data out to you more quickly. But they don't say, and here's a load of time for your teachers to upskill in that. It's just another thing on someone's plate,
Yeah.
So I think there's more and more things piled on which take that time away. And because teachers are the thing they care about is teaching, they don't let their teaching suffer. So they do all these other things that are immediate and pressing and whatever, and then their content and their teacher, the teaching aspect of it is what they do in their own time. And so, I think time is a major factor. Now, I think you get better at that. You asked about new teachers through to leadership. I think, when you're a new teacher, one of the things that most new teachers struggle with is that behaviour management piece. And by the time you're sort of 3 years in, you've generally got a few tricks up your sleeve of how to just nail that. But obviously that changes year on year out to whatever class you've got. And you can get more experienced in that. But I think for a new teacher, behaviour management is something that really can influence their well-being, and they can take a lot to heart. And so they can kind of carry around this, this kid said this to me, or this kid behaved in this way. Like, you can't fix every kid's problem, and you have to have a certain level of resilience. And I think that grows as your career grows, So I think when you're new, you're trying to get new to that. You're trying to get new to school environments. You're trying to learn how to teach the content as well. So you've got a lot in those early new days, But then you sort of progress, and things do, like I say, keep getting piled on. So another one is NCCD testing, and NCCD data, not testing. And so again, there's another level of data collection which is, really important to do. It's for, really purposeful work. But again, there's very little time to do these new things in. And then you go through to a kind of leadership position. And I remember I still had 2 senior classes when I was director of curriculum, and I didn't want to let my teaching suffer. But my whole day would be smashed with leadership things, so either kids or staff, or parents, or, meetings. So many meetings when you get higher up into the leadership realm. And so any teaching and dealing with my own students was what I would do in the evenings or early mornings, So I think, there's a lot in as you go through a teacher's career, it's just so much stuff, so many, I think.
Absolutely. Time definitely shining through there as a common theme, sort of a thread running through all of those problems. But it is interesting to hear the kind of the difference between some of the things like student behavior and adapting that a young teacher would face. But, it is important to remember that, as you say, up in a leadership position, different challenges also arise. And I imagine, another form of stress would be the responsibility that comes with being in a leadership position, and now the ramifications for your decisions beyond merely what happens within the 40 minutes or 60 minutes or whatever of your classroom. It's whatever that leadership position is, but to use kind of the most obvious example, a principal knowing that their decisions have a filter down effect to the entire school presumably causes definitely a strain on well-being as well.
Yeah, and I was talking to a principal last year when we went out for a dinner, and she was sort of giving an example of there was, over the weekend there was a school kind of Duke of Edinburgh camp, and obviously some teachers were on it, etc. But you're never off duty as a principal. If there's things going on that are part of your school, even if it's, like someone's using your school hall for something, really the book stops with you. And, same with any kind of executive CEO position, I guess, the responsibility and the sort of being on call, must be overwhelming. I really take my hat off to the school leaders, fantastic people.
Yeah. With great power comes great responsibility.
It is, yes.
As Uncle Ben once said to a young Spider-Man.
Spider-Man, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not sure how familiar you are with those films.
I am
Classics.
very familiar. I remember showing them for media studies to my year 9.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah, particularly that. Yeah, I could tell you exactly what shot that was done in.
Oh, yikes. Well, I didn't realise I was being such a Spider-Man scholar. We'll have to set up a Spider-Man podcast at some point. For now, we'll continue with teacher well-being. We all know what we're looking forward to the most. So just to kind of move into practicalities for a moment, the sort of practical elements, I wanted to first ask about the individual teacher, because obviously, you know, we'll move on to this kind of bigger institution, schools idea of what they can do, but everything starts with yourself. So I wanted to ask if, for the teachers out there who are listening and who might be looking for, you know, effective, meaningful ways to help maintain their own well-being, what advice do you have for them? What can those individual teachers do under their own steam, both inside and outside the classroom, to deal with the stresses that they face and protect their own well-being?
Okay. Well, any of my family listening to this, I think it's a bit pot kettle black if I talk about outside the classroom well-being.
They're not on the air. It doesn't matter what they think.
I'll talk about inside the classroom first, I think. So I find this one a bit easier. I think that idea of resilience and you know, don't take things to heart too much. Every day is a new day, you know, so if you've had a bad lesson or a bad experience, you know, the next day most kids have forgotten about it and you move on, you know, so don't overly chew on something, you know, that you can blow out of all proportion, that kind of thing. And I think also within that, it's good to do, if you've got behaviour that you're struggling with, I always used to talk to my new teachers about a percentage rule. And so that, you know, they might come out of a class really stressed about, you know, what say a couple of kids had done, and it might be really quite bad what those kids had done. But I would say they'd, you know, reel off 3 or 5 names or whatever, and I'd say, okay, what about the other 80% of the class? Oh, they were awesome. They did this, you know. We had a great chat with so-and-so, everyone, you know, whatever. And I think it's really important to focus on that number of kids. The majority of kids do want to do the right thing. And, you know, you might have some shockers, but I think when you start looking around and thinking what percentage was really doing what I wanted to, and, you know, you take away that and focus on those. And don't let the hard ones take your focus, you know, particularly that's for people with difficult classes or early on in their teacher journey. And then another one, which I think I've mentioned before, a colleague of mine, Margaret, used to say to any new teachers, was that every class is allowed one all singing and all dancing lesson once a week.
Yes, I do recall.
Yeah, you remember this one?
Advice. Yeah.
And she told every new teacher that, and I still remember it. I wasn't a new teacher, but it's still sound advice, whether you knew or not, you know, in that look at your schedule. You know, you might have 3 periods of year 11 a week. Okay, so which one of those is going to be your really all singing, all dancing one, and which, you know, what are the other 2? What are you going to do that's taking some of the pressure off yourself and putting more of the pressure onto the students? You know, where are you increasing their agency and their skills in, you know, being the learner and not just being the sort of receptacle kind of, you know. So, yeah, I think that all singing, all dancing. And then a few things like marking. So my subject, English, I've seen teachers just go under with marking, you know, so set an expectation on what you're going to mark and how you're going to mark it, you know. So it might be that you're going to mark an introduction from an essay or a paragraph of an essay, you know. Don't think you have to do everything, you know, or don't set it if you're not going to you know, set it around a sort of rubric or marking criteria. one of the things that I do when I'm marking lots of exams is I mark the first 5, which gives me a consistent idea of what mistakes there are. And then I make a little grid at the bottom of a marking criteria that says things like write in present tense, expand your thesis, use petal paragraph structure, include more quotations, whatever it is that those 5 kids all had in common. And then I photocopy the rest of my marking criteria with that grid on. And then I can just tick the things. And then my comments are more about encouraging things or just a specific thing to that kid. But I'm not writing out a massive comment every time that just says the same sort of prompts over and over again. So that's a kind of marking load tip. And then I think really lean on your department or your stage team and look at what your strengths are. You might have someone who hates writing programs, and someone who really enjoys, making, like, I don't know, Google Slides or something like that, for the content delivery. And so kind of go, okay, well, I like writing programs. You do the resources for it. I'll write the program, and share things around so that you're leaning on each other and leaning on the skills that each other have.
Hey folks, hope you're enjoying the episode so far, and we've got plenty more to come after this quick break. Here at Atomi Brainwaves, we're all about education, and not just for students, for ourselves too. We would love to hear from you, whether that's feedback on one of our episodes or a question you'd like to see answered by one of our guests or by Sue. So, if you've got a comment or a question, don't hesitate to email us at brainwaves@getatomy.com. Looking forward to hearing from you. In the meantime, let's get back to it.
So those are kind of inside tips for classroom.
Yeah, and they're solid ones, absolutely. And just in terms of in terms of outside the classroom, I wanted to ask, to what extent do you think there's value in leaving in when you're off the clock, when you're away from it all, what you can do to reduce the stress of it? Because, I mean, almost going off on a slight tangent here, but it's just even just talking about this, something has popped into my mind of, I remember when I was in uni, my uni years, not too long ago, it's obviously, this is a very, very different and much lower stakes setup, but I used to do tutoring with a tutoring company, and every Thursday I would my last hour of the day was with a very young man. He shall remain nameless, but he was not the easiest guy to tutor, let's just say. And there were quite a few tantrums with this dude, and if it had just been all tantrums, it would have been maybe one thing. But he was quite a lovely kid when he wasn't, flying off the handle. So it was quite frustrating when I would have this Thursday evening and everything would be going so well. And then if things would go badly and, the lesson would end in tears, and then it would be heading home on my bike, and I would bring it with me. But it also just so happened that most Thursdays were the kind of night out night at uni. Yeah. So oftentimes I would get home and then would be straight out into whatever the party was that week. But it sounds kind of simple, but in a way it was super effective because I would be cycling home thinking about this, carrying it with me, being like, oh, what could I have done, and feeling that stress about it. But then as soon as I got back and was able to throw myself into whatever the evening held, it was out of my head, and by the following morning I was able, and then by the time next week came around, I was able to come at it in a much more relaxed kind of way. Now look, let me be totally clear that this is obviously, as I say, much lower stakes situation than what teachers are facing, and that's their actual full-time job. But the reason I say it is to ask, to what extent is that important, is what you do outside the classroom in your time off, and how you use that. How can you use that to help deal with the stresses within the classroom? Yeah,
I think, I can totally see what you mean with your example. You do need to, leave it behind, almost switch off, go and do something that's totally unrelated. You know, it's really important, I think, to have time when, by all means, talk through your day and that sort of thing, but also have time when you're just talking about something different, you know. And I think the danger for teachers can be, you know, they're online with their emails, then there's Twitter, there's LinkedIn, there might be Facebook where they're part of, you know, like I'm part of the English Teachers Association Facebook. I'm part of some creative English teachers groups in the States Facebook. So even on my Facebook feed, I get stuff about education coming up. So I think it's really important to actually totally disconnect and have time when you identify, you know, Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'm not doing anything online. I'm going to do whatever it is you do sport, read a book, you know, I don't know, go for dinner, like whatever it is that you do. But keep it very much precious time. And I think get some fresh air. You know, for me, whenever I'm stressed, I I don't go and swim in the sea often, but I go and I just like being near the water. I think that kind of timelessness of the waves coming in and out, it just kind of is a bit of a what's the word? Mental cleansing, I think. Yeah. You know,
very poetic. Very poetic way of putting it.
You know,
timelessness of the waves.
I think whatever you need to do, to whatever works for you, I guess, make sure you get some of that time. And I remember talking to one of my young teachers, and if she's listening, she'll know who she is. But I remember telling her at one point that she was just almost old before her time. And I told her to go to Jamboree for the weekend, which for those who might not know what that is, that's like a water park. Or go to Wet and Wild for the weekend, you know, like I was like, you're in your 20s, go and do something fun that's not teaching, you know, just go and, I don't know what you people do, but just go and do something fun. And, you know, and she did, and she felt better. But I think just, you know, don't lose that social connection, because, the work can always be there. And like I said, it's never going to actually feel finished. So you have to decide this is as much as I want to do, this is good. And I'm happy with that, and I'm going to do something else, you know.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, that might be your soundest advice yet that you've given to that young teacher. I haven't been to, was it Jamboree myself?
Jamboree,
but I've been to Wet and Wild, and it is both
fun.
wet and wild.
It is. Do something fun.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely fabulous. So very, very sound advice. Switch off by doing
and if you do something with the
do.
water, you can't have your device.
Exactly.
You see?
Exactly. Yeah. There's a little hidden twist. Alrighty, so those are, you know, some very good outlines of what individual teachers can do, but of course what we need to talk about now is the bigger institution in play, the school. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to ask, first of all, how much responsibility you think falls on the school in terms of protecting and upholding teachers' well-being, how much of it is under their remit, and what are some of the initiatives or programs that schools can undertake in order to uphold that responsibility?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of responsibility on the school, and I think you know, you do what you see modelled from your leaders. So if you as a young teacher, for example, see that your head of department never goes home, you know, still there at 6 o'clock at night, that's what you're going to feel. You kind of have to do that, you know. And certainly there are nights where you've got to be there for meetings, and hopefully not till 6 unless it's parents' evenings or whatever. But I think it's really important to actually get out of school, you know, and be like, okay, I'm going to go home and see my family. And I think if schools don't model that, and they're sort of always there till quite late, then that becomes the norm for the school. And so that, you know, that's what everyone emulates. So I think to sort of model the sort of behaviour that you want with your staff, and to sort of go around and say, it's Friday afternoon, go home, just go and switch off, go do something different, you know. So I think modeling's a big thing. I think noticing and having a sense of gratitude for people's hard work is really important. So just, little notes in people's pigeonholes, or, some like a team dinner, like I've seen heads of the department who always make sure they take their team for dinner. I certainly made sure that I took the heads of department that were in my team, just for something to say, you're working really, really hard and it's noticed and I'm so grateful. So I think that kind of making sure that people are aware of your thanks. I think even devoting some professional development time onto actually what teacher wellbeing is and how to achieve it. But that's quite difficult to do if you then, as a leadership team, don't pick it up. Like if you have an external agency come in and some of the things they recommend are things that you never do, you're going to get the people listening to it go, yeah, well, this isn't how it's done here. So, be prepared to, if you're going to have something like that, be prepared as a management team that you might have to make some changes based on, whatever it is that external company kind of suggests,
It's not just changes for the younger teachers, the more junior members. It's changes for the senior members too.
It's changes for the leadership, So if you have someone come in and say that, for example, say, make sure you have time when you go home, or make sure you have time when you switch off. You need to make sure that then you model that as a leadership team. And I think being aware of people who might need some mentoring or like a buddy to look out for them a little bit more, so that you're really protecting and nurturing any sort of new staff. And that might just, or staff who are struggling. There might be particular aspects where, like they might have a sick family member, or, their situation might have changed, like, people gone through family breakups, or, there's 101 things that people could be experiencing at home that might affect their work. So I think that, noticing that people are human and, real people, and making sure that the school is able to sort of, notice that someone's looking out for each person within the team is really important.
Yeah, some solid initiatives there that schools can undertake, and obviously it's not always going to be the easiest thing, and it's something that, as you say, like for leadership teams, can on paper look easy, but then more is asked of them. But definitely a lot that can be done. To close us out here, the last thing I'm going to ask is for you to, I guess, get out your crystal ball and take a look into the future, because, as we touched on right at the top of the pod, attitudes have changed a lot, as the years have developed, where from a point where teacher wellbeing was almost a term that had never been heard, to a place now where it is being talked about, where it is something being considered. But as you say, it's not at the forefront of minds, and it's in some ways it's a problem causer as well as a problem solver. Where do you think we're moving towards? Where do you see teacher well-being and the attitudes around it being in 5 years, 10 years, moving beyond that? And I guess, to what extent do resources come into that? We talked about how the internet and that has been both a positive and a negative. Where do you see us in the future, and where are we moving towards with regards to teacher wellbeing?
Yeah, I think actually this situation with COVID-19 has actually changed a lot of people's opinions of teachers. And so in some ways, I think teacher wellbeing and, the public support for teacher wellbeing is going to perhaps after this be better than ever. Like I think I've certainly had attacks from even close friends about teacher holidays and all that time that teachers have off and everything. And what they don't realise is that you're absolutely exhausted by the end of a 10-week term. You spend the first week of your holiday sick and the second week planning for the next term. It's not like we just switch off. So I think the fact that a lot of parents have had this window now into the world of a teacher, and the amount of, planning preparation, now with this sort of rapid advent to this sort of home learning model, I've seen so many Facebook posts where people are like, we need to give our teachers a clap, or we need to, they're regarded as sort of essential frontline workers, and we need to appreciate them more than ever. And I've certainly seen a sort of softening attitude towards teachers through that, and much more appreciative. So I think with that in mind, the idea of people supporting that, I hope that translates into, staff being a little bit more protected from, perhaps this bombard of, always being available for parents and students, and a bit more sort of respect from the world of a parent of, teachers do need that time off, and they do a fantastic job. And that idea of, protecting our teachers is something that all of us need to be a part of. Like if you're a parent about to send a massive long email on a Friday night expecting an answer by Monday morning, is that really reasonable? And one of the things that I've noticed so much since I made the switch into the corporate world is corporate switches off at the weekend. I've been picked up a few times by Rob, one of the co-founders of Atomi, sort of saying, you really like to work at the weekend or late at night. And I'm like, I'm sorry. Like, he's like, you don't need to. And I'm like, it's just a really old habit, because people do expect an answer. So, maybe think before you demand that answer over the weekend for Monday morning. Should you really be putting teachers in that position over a weekend, Yeah. So I think, maybe the attitude towards teachers will change from this event. I think wellbeing programs themselves have probably got a long way to come in terms of not being an additional stress to teachers, So I think they're still in their infancy, but it's good that they're around. It's just, how to use them to their best. So I think at the moment it's very much like, individual schools, what can they do? And I think, obviously there's some onus on the individual to actually switch off and to have some of that private personal time, I guess, is really important.
Yeah, well, it's a really interesting take about how, obviously the situation we're in with COVID is it's such a difficult time, but we look for silver linings where we can, and one, as you say, might be this this change in attitude towards teachers for the better, and how that can have a positive knock-on effect for well-being, and well-being programs in their infancy, definitely, but we can only hope, and I think it's fair to say assume, that they will get better as time goes by, and feedback comes, such as what you're saying, comes back in, and those are adjusted accordingly. So I guess tentative hope for the future. Would that be a fair assessment?
No, I think it's much more positive than that. And for all the sort
of a great deal of hope. Yes.
Yeah, a good deal of hope.
Yes.
And for all the sort of list of how difficult it is that I paint it, I still think it's a fantastically rewarding career.
Of course. Goes without saying, Sue. You don't even need to say that. We all know. Yes.
Don't want it to sound like doom and gloom. There's so many things that teachers have to do.
Of course. Of course.
Still an awesome thing to be a teacher.
Absolutely. So that is all we have time for in terms of teacher well-being. But as always, we're going to finish with Sue's hot tip. Now, I don't know how you are going to top your anecdote about advice about Jamboree from earlier. I think that, as I said at the time, might be the best advice you or indeed anyone has ever given. But we are going to ask you to give us, as always, maybe it's a little bit of advice for teachers. Could be a little bit of an anecdote from your own teaching days. Doesn't even necessarily have to have too much to do with education at all. But what is today's Sue's hot tip?
I'm going to quote from Hamlet.
Oh, shocker.
There's a part in Hamlet where he says, I could be bound in a nutshell, but count myself king of infinite space. And then he says, if it wasn't, I had bad dreams, and goes on to, elaborate on that. But that idea of, being bound in a nutshell, but count myself a king of infinite space. I think just find your headspace, find the thing that works for you, that takes away that stress. For me, it is going to see the sea. And my husband will package me up into a car and just go, right, we're going to the coast. And I'm just like, thank you. and I feel better after it, And I have a painting on my wall that a dear friend of mine, Kim, did about being divided, about the sea, and it's just beautiful. But it speaks to me very much, And I think find the thing that speaks to you that can help you to unwind and do more of it. So yeah, and look at that quote from Hamlet because it's fantastic.
Well, wonderful advice, and squeezing Hamlet in as always. I know.
Well, I think I missed a few, but I'm trying.
Yes, he hasn't featured in every podcast, but nearly.
No, we should do a Hamlet bingo. See how many he's featured in.
Between Hamlet and Spider-Man, we are going to be swamped in all of our
I don't think you can actually say those words together in a sentence.
Yes. Alrighty, well, that is all that we have time for today. Everybody, thank you so much for listening. If you want to hear any of our other available episodes, give them a listen on whatever platform you are listening to this on. You can also check us out at our main site at getatomy.com. For now, though, it is goodbye from Sue.
Bye, everyone.
And goodbye from me. Bye-bye.